Hello, it's me, Sputnik Boy. So recently I got E-Man 9. And I just want to make a quick little video where I kind of go through, well, first of all, how much money I made, and then second of all, I want to just give a few tips and kind of show my progression throughout E-Man Slayer. Um, so yeah, I hope you enjoy, and let's just get right into it. So in my quest to get E-Man 9, I've dropped a lot of things. The big things I've really dropped has been one Ender Slayer 7, and then 3 Judgment Cores, which make up the vast majority of the money I've earned. Editing Elise here, just to intervene. I actually dropped 4 cores apparently. I didn't realize that. It's been quite a long time. But I went through my screenshots and my DMs to just kind of double check and try to, well, getting these screenshots, and realized I actually dropped 4. So my profit is significantly higher than I initially thought. I've also dropped 2 exceedingly rare Ender artifact creators. One of them I sold. I still have the other one here. And then I have a bunch of other loot, such as a whole bunch of pocket espresso machines, a bunch of skins, yeah, just a whole bunch of loot from just general slayers, which all add up to not too much money, as you can see. This double chest is only worth 9 mil, another one that's worth 2. This one is worth a little bit more because of the crystal frags and the Smarty Pants books that I've actually upgraded. But take these prices with a grain of salt. All in all, I think all the other loot I've really dropped, besides the 3 Judgment Cores and the Ender Slayer book, only really add up to around maybe 100 mil at most. A large part of that actually being summoning eyes from doing the last bit of my Enderman Slayer journey in the Sea Bruiser hideout. All in all, with all my drops added up together, I think I've earned about maybe 1.6 to 1.8 billion coins. Mainly, obviously, being from the 4 Judgment Cores, but also a little bit from the Enderman Slayer, and actually a decent amount of that being from Summoning Eyes. But yeah, now I just kind of want to take you through a journey, take you through the journey I've traveled personally, with the different setups I've used throughout the different points in my Enderman Slayer journey, and just kind of also give you a few tips and tricks of how you can improve your own Enderman Slayer experience, how you can maybe do your first boss, and also I'm gonna end up just finish this video off with like a deep analysis of how you could optimize a more endgame setup and what you should be kind of be thinking about when you're doing endgame Voidgloom Slayer. I hope you enjoy. So, just starting out here, I just want to show you kind of the setup I'm currently using, or I just used today to get all the way to E-Man 9. As you can see, I've been a little bit unlucky with my latest core drop, and I have over 400,000 XP in my RNG meter, which is a little annoying, but there's a good reason for that, and I will get to that. So yeah, I'm just going to start a quest quickly, and I've been doing it here in the Sea Bruiser hideout. I've been using my recently acquired hype, yeah, to spawning, just running around like this. Obviously using a mythic Enderman pet for the spawning phase to get that sweet extra combat XP. Typically, I've tried to find pretty empty lobbies, and it hasn't been too hard or too difficult to get actual, like, relatively empty lobbies, but if you're struggling with finding good lobbies, or you don't have a good way of killing a lot of bruisers in a short amount of time, I'd simply recommend doing it in the Boiling Sepulchre. Yes. This is pretty much how I've been doing a boss, or doing my bosses with this current setup. I'm using 3/4 burning or better crimson, with a warden helmet, and then I have a tier boosted Ender Dragon pet. This is not a very good boss, as I don't currently have my Crimson Stripes active, and that's something you should very much focus on trying to have if you are using Crimson Armor, is trying to make sure your Crimson Stripe is active, both for the chance to phase skip, but also just it buffs your your damage output by a lot. But as you can see here, this is a pretty average boss where I get, yeah, a 48-second kill. When it comes to Magic Find, this setup doesn't give me that much. As you can see, I only have 169. But this is my fastest killing setup, and basically how I got the last 170k EXP in my Demon Slayer journey. Now, that setup I just showed you wasn't actually the setup I used for the vast majority of my Enderman Slayer EXP. I only used that setup for around the last 100 and maybe 200,000 EXP. But the vast majority, and that's pretty much from around maybe 170k EXP all the way to like 600, or sorry, 800k EXP, I've been using this setup. I actually just realized I don't have it quite properly set up. But what this setup has been consistent of is the same Crimson armor. This hasn't changed forever on Renowned for that extra magic find, and a Renowned final destination per boots. And then I've been using mainly the Strengthened Magma Lord Gauntlet, but this Molten Bracelet is nice for summoning, so I switched to that lately. And then I've used the Brown Belt, and then my Glass Cloak, which has been absolutely clutch and has saved me in so many fights, I could not even tell you. And then I have my Strengthened Rift Necklace, which I didn't used to have the one on, but I got that pretty, yeah, lately. Then I've also been using a Wand of Atonement for healing, an Overflux Power Orb, a Terminator, which I got right around 170,000 XP, and then my Fabled Atom Split, which hasn't really seen much change. I put Ender Slayer 7 on it, around 500k XP, I think, but otherwise it's been pretty much the same like this ever since I began doing Enderman Slayer. Then I have also used my Suspicious Dayax, which has gotten a few upgrades over time, but for basically just magic find swapping. Now, I don't actually have the pet that I normally do this with. I normally do this with a Golden Dragon, but I'm going to be demonstrating this with a Lion pet. Normally, I was using a Golden Dragon buff to level it up. Not spawning, I was still using my Enderman pet, but I was using a Golden Dragon for the boss itself, for that sweet damage, and also that sweet, sweet, sweet magic find. And yeah, I'm just going to be emulating Golden Dragon with a Lion pet, because I don't currently have a hatched Golden Dragon. But yeah, I've basically just been running around killing Endermen like this, popping the ability for the extremists. Just doing this in the Void Sepulchre for about 3, 4, 500, maybe 600,000 XP. Occasionally I went to the Bruiser hideout, but I didn't have a hype when I was using this setup the most. So I normally didn't have the luxury of actually getting very good rates there. But as you can see, I kind of just do pretty much the same as before. I don't have a Warden helmet on now, so I can actually run around pretty freely, and that also means that I tend to run pretty far to try to refresh my Dominus stacks, but I can only really do that during laser phase, as otherwise, yeah, I don't really have time to refresh my Dominus. But yeah, this is pretty much how I've been doing it for the majority, and as you can see here, I then swapped to Dayax for that magic find, and this is a pretty average boss, around 55 seconds. Typically, I got them a little bit faster. That's just mainly been because I've been using a Golden Dragon instead of a Lion Pet, which does do a lot more damage than a Lion Pet, but a Lion Pet is very much a fine alternative. Another little note to say, I never use a Dwarf Turtle Shell Mid. I never used the Dwarf Turtle Shell Mid because I prefer to have just an EXP boost on my Golden Dragon. With the setup, I was getting quite high magic finds. I think I dropped 2 out of my 3 cores with the setup, using my Golden Dragon and Dayan swapping. As you could probably see in the images before, I can just pull them up now. Yeah, I got pretty good magic find. I think it was like 209 or something on average, maybe a little bit more. And then obviously during Aatrox boost, I would get even more. But yeah, this has been basically the setup I've used for the vast majority of my gaming, my Demon Slayer gaming. But yeah, before this setup, I was using a Final Destination setup, and I will show that now as well. This Final Destination set was actually the set I initially got Demon 7 in, and also dropped my first core in. Now, quick little note, I don't have the exact setup I used, and obviously my Final Destination set has a few more upgrades than what it had when I initially started out. Like, I didn't used to have like 60,000 kills on my boost. I only had like, maybe 20,000 kills on the rest of my Final Destination. But more or less, it looked like this, fully fuminged. Mm, Sometimes it was an ancient, sometimes it was unrenowned, depending on kind of what I felt like at the time. And then I also used Last Stand as my ultimate enchant, and put on quite a lot of Last Stand actually, just because it does help with survivability quite a bit. This equipment was basically the same. I don't think I had the Rift necklace at the time because the Rift wasn't out, so I was just using a random molten necklace. But obviously, nowadays, there's no reason I think I was using this molten necklace. There's pretty much no reason not to use a Rift necklace. Just get it. And yeah, otherwise, I was using the same pet. I was still using a golden dragon. I got my golden dragon very, very early on, even before I got into Eman Slayer, really. I'm just quickly gonna demonstrate a boss. Quick little side note, initially I wasn't using my Terminator to get through hits phase. I did switch to Terminator as soon as I got it, and I still was using Final Destination for a while after I got my Terminator. But initially I didn't obviously use my Terminator because I didn't have that. Instead I used a Duplex 1 Juju Bow, which is more or less fine. Obviously the Terminator is better, but the Duplex 1 Juju Bow actually did me very, very well. And it's definitely a method I would recommend if you're looking for ways to get through hits phase pretty reliably and easily without putting yourself at risk too much. Now, obviously my damage wasn't quite as good as it is now. I think I only used to deal about maybe 1.1 million damage per hit. That's obviously mainly because I had worse magic find, or worse, sorry, not worse magic find. I had worse magical power back then when I first got Eman 7. And also I didn't have stuff like Eman Slayer, Ender Slayer 7 on my katana. And I was missing obviously just a bunch of other optimizations. And also, back when I got Enderman Slayer 7 was before a lot of the melee buffs and before the venomous fix. So my boss times weren't really at 57 seconds. I was more looking at around 70 seconds per boss, which was completely fine for me. This also a large part of that was just the slower hits phases because I was using a Juju and not a Terminator. But yeah, this was pretty much the setup I started out with. At the very, very beginning, I think I got to Enderman Slayer 4 using like superior armor and just grinding tier 1s and upgrading my setup a little bit to get tier 2s. I also nowadays have a relic, which I didn't get before pretty late into, I think, Eman Slayer 7, which meant I was also taking a lot more damage, obviously, than I was in that showdown. Also, obviously, I didn't have as many kills, so my survivability has gone up quite a lot too. So generally, it was like this setup, but just a little bit more scuffed in pretty much every area. I was still using the same healing items, the Overflux and the Atonement, and then the Gas Cloak. A big improvement that's actually come in the healings department has actually been the introduction of the Vampire Industrious Relic, and it is absolutely insane. It's one of the main reasons that I could actually switch to Free Force Crimson as fast as I did. The amount of healing it provides is absolutely nuts, and is an absolute must-have if you plan on doing any sort of Enderman Slayer, honestly, in my opinion. But yeah, now I'm gonna go just kind of go through a few more tips and tricks just to kind of improve your setup a little bit, and then I'm gonna go a little bit more in depth of how you can kind of do a more late gate setup and how you can kind of take advantage of stuff like an Ender Dragon and Hype, even if you're using melee setups. Alright, so I'm just quickly going to go through a bunch of small little optimizations you can do. I mentioned a couple of these throughout the video, but I'm just going to quickly recap them here. The first recommendation I have an optimization for both survivability, but also just kind of making sure you get consistent kills is making sure you get a gas cloak. In my opinion, it's an absolute must-have. because of that extra blazing restoration ability. It's basically like upgrading your power orb from like I think a mana flux to like a plasma flux. Honestly, I think that's how much healing it provides you. It's really, really, really good, and in my opinion, an absolute must-have. Um, Other things is making sure you take advantage of the best belt you can get. Obviously, preferably you should have a black belt, but I only have a brown. It functions fine. The black belt just gives you a little bit more damage reduction. And obviously that is because of the damage reduction, it allows you to just tank a lot better. The other third thing that I also briefly mentioned is making use of fuming potato books on your final destination. It honestly helps a lot. You get an extra 20 defense and an extra 10 health per piece if you're fully fuming it, compared to just putting hot potato books on it. It's not that expensive. It's a little pricey. I think it's around 20 million points to fuming your entire set. Maybe like 25, depending on the prices. But it's honestly really, really worth it. And as well, in my opinion, I feel you should obviously make sure to have stuff like Rejuve, but also you should put Renowned on your final destination. If you don't have a Golden Dragon, it's actually a really, really good way of getting attack speed. If you make sure you have the two-headed strike upgrade, because it makes, Renowned give an extra 10 attack speed per piece, which means if you have a full set of Mythic Renowned uh, armor, you're going to be getting an extra 15 attack speed per piece, which means your armor set on its own is going to provide 60 attack speed. And because of the Vicious Darkness ability that the Final Destination armor set has, you're going to be getting an extra 20, which means your attack speed is going to be taken care of. Even for, getting all the way to 100 attack speed, pretty much just having Hurtful gets you there. You can even, tune up a little bit to just make sure you have that 100 attack speed so you can max fire with your Duju or whatever bow you're using to get into through hits phase. But honestly, yeah, Renowned is just really, really good, both for DPS, but also just it gives you extra survivability and obviously that extra magic find, which is just really nice. I could not basically get Renowned. That's just what I'm trying to say. So the final thing, which is something I actually haven't even touched on, is making use of the Instone Sword. This sword, as you can see, has the ability Extreme Focus, which consumes all your remaining mana and grants you damage resistance. And a little bit of extra damage, but that doesn't really matter. The big thing is the damage resistance. Now, I have 1,000 mana heal, which is way, way overkill, but basically what happens is I right click and you see I get 50% damage resistance for 5 seconds, and then I'll obviously get a little bit more damage on my next hit, but that doesn't really matter. But basically what you can do is if you have a decent amount of mana and you have a overflux down, for example, your mana is going to be ticking up quite rapidly, which means if you have just a little bit of ultimate wise on your Instone Swords, for example, you can pretty much keep a permanent uptime on that 50% damage resistance. As you can see there, as soon as it wears off, I get another 50% damage resistance. And I can just keep doing this. And basically what that means is that you can have a permanent 50% damage resistance if you're very, very diligent with making sure you make use of the sword. Basically for free, without really having any issues. Now the only caveat with this is you're not going to be able to use your Soul Cry ability quite as much as you might want to. Another thing is that you're gonna want to have overflow mana. You're gonna want to have whatever cell you can get your hands on. In my case, it's obviously the super cell, but I think if we go into the soul flow, you can make do with like something just like the battery, which is really, really cheap. Obviously, at only 1.6 million coins, it's really not very expensive and can give you 400 overflow mana, which is just really, really nice. Just make sure that you have enough mana to obviously use stuff like your healing wand and still using the ability for stuff like Hits Phase. Yeah. Now, speaking of Hits Phase, something that's really, really important is that you make sure that you combo Hits Phase with your Soul Cry ability, even if you're not meleeing it. It's pretty much whatever, like no matter what you're doing, unless you're doing Necromancy to get through, then it doesn't matter. But if you are using a bow like a Terminator or a Duplex with or duplex juju with explosive arrows, obviously. Popping your ability will allow you to get so many more hits, like the Soulcry ability, because that 400% ferocity actually applies to your arrows. Because it applies to your profile in general, which means they also apply to the arrows. This allows you to get literally 4 times as many hits in per hit space and gets you through it literally 4 times faster, basically for just a little bit of mana. It's absolutely game changing and can shave off like 10 to 5 to 10 seconds of like pretty much of every boss kill, which is just really, really good. Now, one final little tip that I almost forgot about is making sure that you have a Ruby Power Scroll on your healing items. This is mainly important on your wand, but also important on your Atom Split or whatever sword you're using. Basically get an Atom Split because it also gives you damage resistance for Enderman. But basically just make sure you have a Ruby Power Scroll on it because it actually helps quite a bit with healing, if you didn't know. There's a bunch of different power scrolls in the game, obviously, with the Sapphire one giving you a little bit of mana, and the Jasper giving you a little bit of strength, Amethyst giving a little bit of defense, and Amber giving mining speed. But then there's the Ruby power scroll, which I have on actually. There's also the Opal one, which actually grants true defense. You can see here, it heals you for 1% of your missing health. Now, that doesn't sound like too much, and it isn't that much, but it does actually turn out to be quite a decent bit of healing because it gets multiplied by stuff like your vitality. So it can help quite a bit. The rest of this video gets very, very nerdy. So if that's not something you want to watch, or you don't really want to see how an endgame player does Demon Slayer, you can go now. I said all I wanted to say. And I hope you have a good day. But if it is something that interests you and you want to see how a endgame player should be doing Enderman Slayer and kind of what they should be thinking about while they're doing Enderman Slayer, you can watch this next bit and I will go into a bit more detail. And I will also at the end of the video go into kind of what you should, what your Enderman Slayer should look like if you're trying to make money off Enderman Slayer, beyond something like just going for Eman 9. Now at this point, I've pretty much gone through all the tips that I had for that applies to everyone, and I'm going to be deep diving a little bit into how you can kind of do some end game Enderman Slayer, and is also doing end game Enderman Slayer into Sealer Bruiser hideout because honestly, in my opinion, it's the best place to be doing Enderman Slayer. If you're late game and have access to stuff like a hype. Now the requirements are pretty hefty. What you kind of need is you need a Terminator to get through his face effectively. You also need preferably a Warden helmet. You can get away with just a Crimson helmet. That's pretty high tier, but preferably a Warden helmet and some high tier Crimson. Obviously, the best equipment you can get your hands on. Must-haves include the gas cloak and the wrist necklace. Nice-to-haves are a black belt. I don't have that, but I would still recommend using any sort of belt you can get your hands on. And then any sort of glove works. I just get one with a high level of veteran, maybe some magic find as well, so you can get faster spawns and get a little bit more magic find on your kills. Now, this setup, I'm not going to be talking about like what's most effective for money making. This setup is focused on just getting the fastest boss kills and getting as many boss kills per hour as possible. Now, you also do need a hype. This is mainly for the spawning, but also helps with healing during this boss fight itself. I would still recommend staying on hype and not switching to something like an Estrella or a Scylla for that extra healing, simply because the intelligence you get from holding the hype is really, really useful, and I will show that off shortly. Then obviously you need a power orb, preferably an overflux. The better the power orb, the better. Obviously you can use a plasma flux as well. You don't really need a Daedalus axe because you're going to be using E-Drag, which means you don't get advantage from Chimera, but if you have one, sure, you can equip it, it doesn't really matter. You don't need an instant sword either, but you obviously need an app split as well. Then for the pets, you want an Enderman pet. I feel like that makes pretty much explains itself, but then you also want a legendary Ender Dragon pet. Whether it's tier boosted or true doesn't matter too much. If it isn't tier boosted, and it is a true legendary Ender Dragon, you can go with just a Dwarf Turtle Shelmet. That's a pretty no-brain play, but you could also go for something like a Clover for that extra 7 magic find, and would also give something like a Daedalus Axe a little bit more purpose. But it's up to you. You don't have to. I'd personally go for a Clover just because I prefer Magic Find over Knockback immunity, but if you really, really like Knockback immunity, you can go with a Shell Med. For the spawning phase, you're going to want to try to find as empty of a Bruiser hideout lobby you can get. This one isn't super empty, but I think it's just going to do for showcasing purposes. Then what you're basically going to do is you're going to be hyping around like this, making sure that you have a supercell with overflow mana active at all times, because it means that you can pretty much keep hyping even if you don't have, even without using Mage Forges. You shouldn't have any issue with one tapping the Sealer Bruisers. And then whenever a mini boss spawns, you obviously just kill it as fast as you can. I prefer to pop the ability, you don't have to, but it does kill the mini bosses significantly faster. But yeah, just kind of hyping around. If you ever get a special sell it, you don't have to just beeline it to it, because you're going to get the summoning eye no matter what. But yeah, just kind of keep doing this. Try to prioritize large groups. But yeah, then as the boss spawns, a couple things happen. I'm going to go through this in more detail right after. Don't be too worried about running out of mana. You probably will, but it's not that big of a deal. Just try to make sure you have the ability active during pretty much all times. And there, as you could see there, I got a phase skip, and that's something obviously you're trying to chase. And as you can see, it can result in some pretty crazy fast boss times. That was personally, I think, yeah, one of my fastest boss times of all time, which is kind of fitting. But yeah, you can get some really, really fast boss times using these methods, especially if you can get phase skips. Now, phase skips aren't reliable. You can't get a phase skip every single boss, especially if you're doing like 100 bosses in a row. But if you make sure to have your Crimson Swipe ability up going into the last phase, you have a pretty good chance of getting it. Now, I'm going to be rolling that back and just kind of commenting on it. So, straight away here, when my boss is spawning, there's a couple things that happens. I obviously spawned it with my Wither Impact, but that doesn't really matter. What does matter is that I have my Advent Blade ability active, as you can see, and I have my Terminator out. And what I start doing is I start pre-firing the spawn location. This just helps getting through the first hit phase as fast as possible. As you can see here, the server lags, so I'm a little bit confused, but it ends up working out. And my ability does time out here in the middle of the hit phase, which is not optimal, but it ends up being fine, and I can still get through hit phase pretty fast. Then what I do here is that I hype the ground for two different reasons. The first reason is for the overheal shield. Yeah, just the massive amount of overheal. I don't think you can see it right because of the chat, but I think I have like 6,000 health or something, which helps a lot with not dying, especially when you're running a pretty fragile loadout or setup because you're not using any Final Destination pieces. But what's also important is that I hit another enemy with my implosion. That's why I hype the ground and not hype the boss. Is because I'm trying to hit enemies that are behind me. In this case, there was probably a Sealer Bruiser right behind me. And what this does, it is refreshes my Dominus ability. Because otherwise, my Dominus would time out here in a couple seconds, which means it wouldn't last for the entire phase. Now that I refreshed it by just hyping the ground before I went in to stab the Void Gloom, it is going to last the entire phase and allows me to get through this phase very, very quickly. As you can see, the health gets absolutely shredded. I almost phase skip here. I only have 4 million health left on the boss, but obviously I don't. But, you know, it's very, very low now, and basically it means as soon as it comes out of lasers, I'm pretty much ready to go into his phase. Now, in this laser phase, this first laser phase is actually kind of important because what the goal for this first laser phase is to get down your overflux orb or get down your power orb, whatever it might be. In my case, because I have a hype, what I do is that I switch to holding it. As you can see, I'm just holding it. I'm not hyping anything, I'm just holding it. And what that does is it increases my intelligence by a lot, but also increases my mana regen by a lot. Which means it allows me to actually get enough mana for my power orb. But what's also very important is that now, right here, as there's about a second left, I switch to holding out my power orb, and I don't place it down immediately, but I wait till my mana updates. because a power orb or power orbs are percentage based, this just means that I don't use 600 mana to pop down my power orb because I give it a chance to actually update and realize I'm not holding my hype anymore. This means I can place it down and still have mana left, and that's very important for this phase. Um, because now, obviously, it's out of lasers, it just teleports behind me. I quickly turn around, and then I pop the ability as soon as I can, because I know it's just about to go into his phase. And obviously, as I hit it the first time, it immediately goes into his phase because it was so low. And what I do then is I start running backwards as fast as I can. I'm wearing a Warden helmet, so it's a little hard to get away. But the more risky you're comfortable with playing, the faster you can get these boss times. So I have done this quite a few times, so I'm pretty confident and that I can do this without killing myself. Just make sure you don't kill yourself with explosive arrows. And yeah, I quickly get through here. Now, I don't get through the entire hits phase, and this is a little bit of a mistake, but I kind of panicked, and I ended up saying, screw it, I'm just gonna finish off the hits phase with melee, and it ends up being fine. It ends up not being an issue. And I again do the same thing, where I wither impact the ground. And as you can see here, the Sealed Bruiser is the one that got killed this time. I actually killed two Sealed Bruisers, but this one, I think is the one that mainly refreshed my Dominus ability. Which means I have Dominus going into the second phase as well. So I actually get through the last bit of hits phase, and now I didn't have enough mana to actually repop my ability, which means the Void Gloom actually has a little bit more health than I would like it to have going into this lasers phase. Preferably you obviously want to phase skip, but that's not always possible. But it's an okay amount of health. It's still gonna get bursted down in about 1 or 2 hits. So it's fine. Now in this phase, there's not really much you can do. I just kind of look around. Obviously, I get all the beacons I can, and then I also try to look around and refresh my Dominus once more. And I'm just ready to obviously stab it as soon as it comes out of lasers. I immediately chunk it for 15 million health because of the Dominus swipe. And as you can see, it only takes about 1 or 2 hits, and it's already in hits phase. I pop the ability on my Atom Split, and I start terming it. Obviously, I'm flying at the legs or at the feet. This is also very important because it means that I hit the Void Gloom with both the explosion from the explosive arrows, but also with the arrows themselves. And I get through his phase extremely fast here. And again, I have the ground. As you can see, I refresh my Dominus because I hit another enemy. And what this allows me to do is it allows me to actually get through and phase skip the final phase, and obviously gives me a very, very good time. This setup doesn't give crazy amounts of magic find, but what it does give is really, really good boss times. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say, going through this at the slow motion. If you can't do everything all at once, try to focus at one aspect of at a time. Maybe try to do stuff like Warning for Crimson to just kind of try to get as much uptime of your swipe as possible. And then once you get more comfortable with refreshing your swipes, using your hype, using the mobs around you, you can start to do stuff like switching out your Crimson helmet with a Warden helmet to get that extra damage. And eventually, once you get a good enough setup, you can even switch out from using an Ender Dragon to a Golden Dragon, which won't give you more damage, but what it will do is will give you a whole bunch of magic find and can allow you to actually start getting some drops. So yeah. Now, just before I end this video here, I do just quickly want to talk about the way you should actually be doing Enderman Slayer if you want to make money off it. First of all, I still think doing it in the Bruiser hideout is a good idea because you get a bunch of summoning eyes and it can help you quite a bit with earning money. But what you should actually be doing is you should both be using a Golden Dragon for the spawning phase, a Golden Dragon with a combat XP boost for both the spawning phase, but also the boss itself. There's 2 reasons for this. For the spawning phase, it's quite important actually. Obviously, don't have it level 200, but have it as close to 200 as possible, and then you're going to be taking advantage of the money you're gaining from all the combat XP you're gaining. Enderman Slayer gives a bunch of combat XP, and just using your golden dragon to actually spawn the boss itself can grant you quite a few levels per hour. I think it's like 1.5 golden dragon levels per hour or something, if you're very efficient and can get a good lobby. But yeah, it's quite a lot of money, extra per hour. And yeah, then why you're going to obviously be using a golden dragon for the actual boss itself, even if you do have a legendary E-Drag or something, is simply because it gives a stupid amount of magic find. Um, I think you gain like an extra 15 magic find or something, depending on kind of how good your gold collection is and whether or not you're day X swapping. If you're day X swapping, you can get a lot more than that, and you can get upwards of like an extra 50 magic find compared to using just an Ender Dragon, which just adds up to be way more value because you're going to be dropping way more cores like that than if you were just sticking with the with the E-Drag. Your boss times will be a little bit slower than what I showed in this video, especially because you most likely won't be able to use something like a Warden Helmet and will probably have to resort to just 3/4 Crimson with one piece of Final Destination just to be able to survive, unless you're really, really endgame. But yeah, that's basically kind of what you should be going for if you want to make money off E-Man Slayer. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have. If you have any questions about how you should be tackling Enderman Slayer, you can leave them down below. Um, just, yeah, keep in mind that I'm a pretty high level. I'm level 295, which means I'm getting quite a lot more health than someone who's just around level 180, for example. Which means all my EHP is quite a lot higher than you probably can get away with. But yeah, just like kind of keep that in mind. You're probably going to have to start out using more pieces of Final Destination. Probably just stick with Final Destination until you get something like a relic. Overall, I just hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you later. Hopefully I can actually put out some more videos. I'm not going to promise anything though.